السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بإذن الله, today we'll be speaking about a topic that everybody can relate to, and that is the topic of learning the Arabic language. You would find that every single one of us, no matter who we may be, no matter how old we may be, everybody has either a dream to learning the Arabic language, or there are those who want their children to learn the Arabic language, and so on and so forth. So inshallah, we'll be speaking a little bit about this topic, a very vast topic, and also at the same time, we'll be touching on maybe a bit of on the journeys of Sheikh Ibrahim and myself, and a bit of the experience or some of our experiences on this journey. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. How are you, Shaykhna?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm well and in good spirits, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Shaykhna, today we're speaking about a topic that's applicable to everybody. When it comes to the Arabic language, we find that every Muslim, either they all have dreams to learn the Arabic language. There are those who go on to learn it. If they haven't, they want their children or their grandchildren to learn it. So Shaykhana, when it comes to this topic, I think there's a few ways of looking at it. Firstly, it's you're learning a new language, and it's to do with a method or a certain teaching way. And what we can say is that people will ask, what's the best way? What's the best way? I think when it comes to the method in and of itself, there's so many different ways of learning something. So we can't say that this is the best way or this is the best way. We can say that what's best for a person who learns in a specific way. So you might find that there's somebody who is more a person who listens. They learn from listening. So for them, maybe it would be easier to start off with that path. And then there are those who are more visual. There are those who more want to write, etc. Shaykhana, what would you have to say as a brief introduction to the topic of the Arabic language, maybe encouraging people to learn it, etc.?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the reason why people want to learn the Arabic language is because the Quran was revealed in this word. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that indeed inna anzalnahu Qur'anan Arabiyyan. So we sent it down with the Arabic word. And this is why people want to learn the Quran, understand it. This is the word of their maker. Majority of the Muslimin want to learn Arabic for this reason. So they go and they start to search and learn find a way as to how to learn the Arabic language. Now, I think it requires a lot of dedication, and that is what is important to mention. Even if it may be a very small amount of time in a day, you've got to have dedication and consistency in learning it, because without these two, you're not going to go very far. You may learn for 5 hours a day for, say, 1 week, and you leave it for another 3 or 4 months. And what happens is that whatever you've learned, you've forgotten, and then now you've got to start again. So I think that that's something that people need to pay attention to when they're starting to learn the language, is have dedication and consistency.
As Sheikh Ibrahim mentioned, that once you're somebody who's interested in learning the language, you want to learn a bit more, you've got to dedicate, you've got to realize your goal. Obviously, as every Muslim, your goal is you want to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you want to understand His word, you also want to understand what the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam came with, the ahadith, etc., his sayings, his lifestyle, and you want to be able to read in the Quran, read in the Sunnah, read other beneficial books. So when it comes to this, it's important for us to dedicate ourselves firstly. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you. Also have a good intention, an intention of wanting to benefit yourself and wanting to benefit others, bi'idhnillah. Shaykhana, when we look at the people, obviously there are those who are at different levels. Let's start with somebody who knows absolutely nothing, zero. They've heard Arabic and they want to get onto the train, so to say. what do you think that, or where do you think they should start? Obviously, we've learned in different environments and different settings. There are those who start off with the bare minimum or the very basics. When it comes to the children, they teach them some of the letters and then how to pronounce them so they can go on to reading the Quran. So there's the reading part of it, there's the speaking part of it, there's the writing part of it, there's the communication part of it. So there's a lot. What would you say when it comes to somebody who's zero, who knows absolutely nothing and they're interested? Where should they start?
I think of importance is the letters. You've got to start with the letters, definitely, because if you don't have that basis, then it becomes very difficult for you to do anything in any language, to be honest with you. If you don't recognize the letters, then how are you going to be able to read in the first place? And that should be the first goal of a person, is to be able to read and understand. So you recite and understand. Now, I think when this language is being taught in the first place, there are certain countries where people learn, or most of the countries where people learn, and they learn to recite, but they don't know what they're reading. And this is where the problem starts in the first place, in terms of understanding. Because if you don't learn to understand whilst you're reciting, then you've left out a huge part of a language that is, that is the main focus or reason for you to be able to read in the first place. Of course, with the Quran, we want to be able to recite it. It's important to recite it. But at the same time, if you really want to inculcate, and this comes to teaching children, etc., if you really want them to learn the Arabic language, start with even basics from a young age. Because if you don't teach them these basics, then they're going to learn to read without understanding. And I find that this is the way that I learned the language. And what happened is, essentially, I learned how to recite, and I couldn't actually understand what I was reading. So when I learned the Arabic language and the understanding of it, then what happened is I would recite, but there was a disconnect between my recitation and understanding. And I had to now build that bridge to bring it together. So this is the problem that I'm trying to address when teaching only the recitation of the Quran. Of course, it's not possible in some places where the teacher himself doesn't understand the Arabic language, but he's just teaching the recitation. But I think that people can actually try and put their children with people who do know the Arabic language and can teach them some basics at least.
You mentioned a very interesting point, a very important point, especially when it comes to children. Children, as they're growing, their minds are fresher, they're able to pick up more. The development that goes on in the mind, how it expands and how they're able to pick up much more. People should use that opportunity and that time, give them some vocabulary, give them some words. So as they're learning to read the letters, join the letters, recite the words, eventually recite the Quran, if you tell them, vocabulary. I remember when we were young, my father used to give us just a few words, numbers, etc. Till this day, I remember those few words just because they were thrown like that and we just used to speak. So if you've got children, especially, few vocabulary words or few words, and let them pick up, you'll find that they'll remember. The more you get, you carry on giving them, you find that they eventually have this bank of vocab, so to say.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And like you mentioned, just learning a few words, few letters, it helps from the start. And the importance of speaking, these few steps, these small steps, is not necessarily noticed in the beginning. But later on in life, it comes to the fore, where you realize that I know this from somewhere, somehow, or I have a connection to it in some way. And it's amazing, Also, possibly just teaching them like the words of the Quran, the ones that they're learning to read, then that would be of help as well.
Okay, I was just reading one of the comments. It's a bit long, but as you mentioned that when it comes to this, you give the children, you give the people. Let's say you got somebody who's a bit older, right? So they're not really into the vocab, or you've taught people who are much older, I'm quite sure. and you've taught them how to recite the Quran from the very beginning. People who couldn't recite in the first place, how would you address them, or how would you teach them?
Sorry, I wasn't with you for a moment.
When you've got people who are much older, let's say we've spoken about children, people who are younger, people who can pick up. Let's say people who are much older, I'm sure you've taught people to recite the Quran, people who knew absolutely nothing and they were much older in age. Would you have a different approach?
Yes, absolutely. I did try to teach them the normal way, which is you have a lesson every night and they come in and they learn, and well, that's what I was doing. And honestly speaking, I succeeded for about 4 weeks, where they were all attending, they were coming, they were regular, and then one by one, someone had some job and he couldn't attend, and I realized that they weren't attending regularly. So when you miss a lesson in Arabic, one lesson, it becomes very difficult for you to connect the next lesson with the previous one because you've missed something in between. So I realized that, this is not the best way to teach them. And I think that when it comes to adults and people that are a bit older, an easier approach might be to tell them to either learn online, because they can do it at their pace, or to possibly teach them just the words in the Quran initially, just the words, what they mean, and when they have a general gist of the words that are in the Quran, then they'll begin to form sentences within themselves. So they'll understand that this is what is meant in this ayah. And they can always go back to the Quran and search, what did the meaning of this passage that was recited in tonight's salah, what was the meaning? This is what I understood from it, and this is how. And if you notice in all of this, you've got this ardent desire to learn the Arabic language. Now, people all say that we want to learn, but who is willing to put that time in and dedicate a portion of time to be able to really study? Those are the ones that succeed, and those are the ones that do well. They find a way to study.
We've touched on people who are generally going to go to a madrasa to learn the Quran, to learn how to read a little bit, recite a little bit. Then you've got people getting to the next level. Now they are more serious. Some of them, they have the good opportunity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them the opportunity to go abroad and learn in an institute. Others, we can start with those who may not have that opportunity at home. You did speak about online, and you spoke about how there are courses there. What can a person do for himself besides the courses? Obviously, you would find a course, but for yourself, let's say you want to get a step further, because the Arabic language is not only just knowing a bit of vocab here. No, you then need to learn some sentence structure, etc., etc., etc. So what would you say here?
To be honest with you, if you want to learn how to speak, etc., then you've got to get into the environment. That's the best way to do it. You've got to be in an environment where people are speaking, they're interacting in Arabic, they can't speak any other language, or you can't speak to them in any other language besides Arabic. I remember when I first went to university in Medina, they insisted on putting you in a room where people could not speak your native language, because if you spoke to them in your native language, then you would never get a chance to practice the Arabic language. And I remember going, as I went there and I got there, there were a few friends, there were people that told me that, look, speak to whoever you can in the Arabic language. And I'd speak to the taxi drivers, and I'd speak to the guards, and anyone I could speak to. And alhamdulillah, that really benefited me in terms of speech. I was at a great advantage in terms of reading and understanding, because I had already learnt with my grandfather, our grandfather, so to speak. So we knew, I knew how to read, I knew how to understand, I knew what I was reading, I understood. But there was this problem of speaking. I just couldn't speak, formulating words, and sometimes you'd understand what the man says, but you can't respond. So the only way to get over that is to listen and to speak, to have conversation. So it took me some time, but alhamdulillah, within about 6-7 months, I could converse quite well, because I was outgoing. I didn't mind making mistakes, people laughing at me. Whereas I saw some people who started with me and they finished 7 years later not being able to converse properly in the Arabic language simply because they didn't interact. They had, an introverted type of, a character, and they couldn't interact with others. So it became difficult for them.
Yes, you find the students who usually stayed in their own cliques with people from their own country or their own language, they didn't really progress. And if there's anything we can take from what you mentioned is that for those who want to get serious in starting to learn the Arabic language, speaking, reading, writing, listening, communicating, you need to start by changing your environment. If when you go to an institute, it's going to be mixing with other people. If you don't have that, opportunity right now, look at the things you're listening to, whether it's a good lecture or whether it's something else, something permissible even. Try and give some time for it in Arabic. If not, try and give all your time in it. At the beginning, you won't understand anything. You'll slowly start picking up a word or two here and there. You'll pick up a word, you'll pick up two, because you'll carry on hearing certain words constantly. That's what I found. You hear certain words constantly, and all of a sudden, because this speaker says it in a certain way, then in a different context, then he's got a hand action, and then you'd find, okay, that word means this, that word means this. At the same time, subconsciously, you're taking in a lot. So from knowing absolutely nothing, you're now starting to pick up a few words. You're now starting to hear words that you may not know their meanings, but it's slowly starting to stick. So that change of environment that you mentioned is very important. Whether you go and learn in a place or an institute, you need to come out of your comfort zone. It's okay. In fact, it's very good to be making mistakes. I think that's one of the main pieces of advice you gave me when I came to Medina, is that speak with everybody, anybody and everybody. Just start speaking, make as many mistakes as you can, and you find that you progress.
What I found amazing with the way you were learning also, if you don't mind me saying this, was to watch videos where a speaker is speaking in Arabic, even though you don't understand fully. And subhanAllah, I think that benefited you a lot. Maybe you can shed some light on that.
So what I noticed is that even in the English language, it's because for those who know English, you won't really notice it. But when you're learning a different language, you will notice it. There's certain speakers who, when they speak, they won't really speak in deep language. It's clear cut. And when they speak, they express themselves in a specific way. So for example, the guy is speaking or the sheikh is speaking and he raises his voice here and he knows how to use his hand. Slowly I found, that was for me, I found that I started picking up, whereas people who are much more advanced, let's say at the very beginning, somebody who's, explaining tafsir in depth, I just found that I didn't really get it. But at the same time, I'll mention that there was some durus in Haram at the time and some abwab, I'm looking at them, some chapters in fiqh, for example, shuf'ah, etc., etc. These words, I heard them 10 years ago. I heard the word once, twice, thrice. The word stuck with me. So when I then went into it 1 or 2 or 3 years later, I had some confidence because I had heard the word before. I had a gist of it, maybe 0.5%. But that helped me, walillahi alhamd. So listening a lot, I found, was of benefit.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. That's something that a lot of people don't do. Like, they don't start with that type of manner of studying. So I just found it amazing that you actually learn from this. And I remember a teacher in Ma'had al-Lugha when we were studying the Arabic language still. And the sheikh was like, the best way to learn would be to listen to others, listen intently to others when they speak. And I found this amazing because he says that this is your first port of call. This is where the words enter into your brain, so to speak, from your ears. So you're listening. If you listen carefully, then you see the context, you see how they're behaving with each other, and you realize that this is what this means generally. And of late, I've been studying, although it's a different language, I haven't been studying it, but I've been trying to speak it, our native language here in Zimbabwe. And I found the best way to do it is to listen, watch what they're saying between each other. And for a few years now, I've realized that I get the gist of a conversation when they're speaking. And sometimes someone will be speaking about you and they think you don't understand, yet you do understand. So you'll be sitting and saying, hey, but what did you say? You said this about me. And he said, but you don't speak Shona. I said, yes, but I get the gist of what you're saying, you know. So that is one of the most amazing ways to learn, actually, which is to just listen and listen to people when they speak, listen intently to what they're saying and how they say it between each other. Yeah.
So we've touched on people who would start off from the very beginning, roughly, where they would be able to read the letters, read the Quran, which is extremely important. Thereafter, you want to understand a bit more, try and mix with the people before even going to an institute or whatever. Try and change your environment. If you have somebody, and you'll find in a lot of countries, even if everybody speaks English, you might find that one person from an Arabic speaking country or those two people, mix with them, speak with them, learn from them. You know, they may want to learn English, exchange words, etc. And you try your best, going a bit more in depth. So the Arabic language, there's different parts to it. So you've got a whole grammar side, which is different to the English language. You've got your vocabulary side. You've got your how to put your sentences together. Usually you'll find when you start going a bit more in depth, especially in the institutes, and every institute differs. I know in Medina, for example, they would give you the very first books, even though we didn't learn in the first mustawa, but the first books, when you look at them, it's like pictures with words, just vocab. So you've got the word and the picture. You can obviously substitute it now with online, on YouTube, look at somebody who's doing it, and you start getting it. Eventually, they start giving you small sentences, so 1 or 2 words. Then you learn how to say, for example, this is a book, and this is the masjid, and this is a man, and this. So they're trying to drill that one word into you.
Yes, wallahi, yes, go on.
And then after that, you find as you progress, so the next mustawa or the next level up, they start giving you a few more words, a bit more vocab, and they introduce you to a sentence structure that's a bit wider. Because remember, when you go into a foreign land or you live in a place where they only speak Arabic now, you can't choose that, okay, I only want to learn how to speak, or I only want to learn how to write. You have to go into taxis, you have to go into the restaurants, so you have to start speaking. So there's a speaking part, there's the reading part, there's the writing part, there's all that. And you find at the beginning, you might find it as an overwhelm, but all that, it refines you and helps you in all these areas. So that's what I found. And as you progress through it, you would find they then give you the grammar slowly but surely. And even though it's extremely good syllabus, and we both went through it, when it comes to the grammar side, I found that there are other books, for example, that it's a bit more in order, so to say. So for me, that is, other people learn differently. People learn differently. So you would find that if you want to learn the Arabic grammar, for example, a small book like Ajur Rumiya, where he speaks to you from the very beginning about the grammar and when it will be ism and fi'l and harf, a noun and a verb, etc., and why one would be a fatha, why one would be a dhamma, etc. So you would find yourself progressing now slowly. So after your vocab, you know how to build the sentence, you know when a fatha comes, when a kasra comes, etc., and that is in your grammar.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the grammar is so important that if you don't have it, you can't understand sentences and make them up. It becomes difficult for you to construct proper and correct, grammatically correct sentences. And the beauty of it is if you learn one principle and then apply it again and again and keep applying it until you've got it completely, you can actually do that until you get to the next. So you don't have to jump from one to the next to get something altogether. And there's these two very different methodologies, where one is you learn all of the rules and you learn simple examples with them, and that all comes together at once, which is a very difficult method according to me, because you're learning all of the grammar at once. It's not easy. It's like mathematics, where you've got one equation, you've learned it, you've understood it, now use different examples to bring that into practice. that would be the better way to do it. Imagine someone was to come to you and introduce 20 different principles or equations in mathematics and tell you, right, this is how each one works, now remember them. It becomes very difficult for you to remember. So it would be better to pick up one principle, simple principle for those who have been studying and are studying, for example, what they call tarkib idafi. And you know that it has mudaf and mudaf ilayh. It's got these two, parts to it. And you now take that and look at different examples and think of different examples, put them into practice, and do that over and over and over again until you've got the concept, the basics of it. Then you move to the next, principle or rule, which may be mubtada and khabar, the beginning and the end of a sentence, or the news of a sentence. It's very interesting. So I think that this way is much more effective, to be honest with you, than having someone come and gather all of the principles at once. That can be done later on, once you've understood all these principles.
And also for those teaching, you must remember when you're teaching these books, your students are different, the people learning are different. And I was trying to look at a few things. Inshallah, these things you have to plan and they don't come out perfectly. You have to try over time. And I found going through a lot of books that teach Arabic that sometimes people just want to take that book the way they learnt it in an institute and slap bang, put it in another place or another country and teach it as it is. And sometimes you would find that you have to change a lot, or you have to use different methods. So, for example, try and get your people, I remember, or the students you're teaching, before teaching them, give them a brief idea of, what they're going to learn. So many times you'll be learning in some books, you don't know what principle they're trying to tell you. So tell the guy at the very beginning, or your student, that you know what, in this lesson we want to learn this, so this is the part we're going to concentrate on mainly. And you have that structure. It will come with time, and obviously there has to be trial and error.
Yes, absolutely. I think so a lot of these rules can also be applied to other languages when people are learning them, how they can, get into a language and how they can start to learn it, etc. I've also seen some people who just sit and watch, videos over and over and over again. They'll be watching YouTube videos on a documentary, for example, or something, a person speaking and addressing them, and they'll just be watching these videos until they get it right. So that's good. That method can work for speaking, etc. Understanding and speaking, conversing, that method can work. But at the same time, we need to highlight something here. You've got Arabic language, which is Fusha, which is the proper language, and then you've got the colloquial slang. So that's those two. You've got to differentiate between the two and learn the proper, correct Arabic first of all before you move on to anything else.
You mentioned such an important point that sometimes, yes, speaking wise, you will get by. But if you want to go in depth a bit more, know the Quran, know the Sunnah, fiqh, etc., you would have to know grammatical rules. You would have to know different rules when it comes to the Arabic language. Going a bit deeper, you would find after that you've got a basic idea. You know how to use a dictionary. You know how to look up words. You know where the fatha, where the dhamma, where the kasra goes. Eventually now what happens is you've got this tool. This tool now you try to use. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be a tool that you're going to carry on perfecting as you move. So you'll start reading in fiqh, and you'll start reading in tafsir maybe, and you'll start hearing things. You'll find at the very beginning you may not be able to read a lot, but you'll start understanding a lot. You'll start listening a lot. And slowly you go more in-depth. There's obviously a whole side when it comes to the poetry, and when it comes to language and going in-depth, that has its side also to it. So I think we're trying to give you a short idea or a brief idea of this short path where you can get to the Quran and Sunnah quickly. More than that, then you would spread out.
Yes, absolutely. It is a very brief introduction. as to how to learn and the methodology, how to go about learning. Someone was asking, are there any specific books? I know you mentioned Ajurumiyya, but is there, for English speakers, would you suggest any specific book?
You see, I don't know. As we mentioned, everybody learns differently. The book we mentioned was to do with Nahu, specifically grammar. And after that, somebody can go a bit more deeper into Alfiya, Ibn Malik. But that's to do with the grammar side. There's all different sides to the Arabic language. And at the beginning, you would find if you're unable to change your environment completely, sometimes you can use the Google Translate to see some words, or you can look up some things in English. But don't, if you're able to start without doing it, just getting into Arabic and asking and making your mistakes, that would be better, because the minute you've got something that you can lean back on, you become a bit more complacent and a bit more lazy. But at the same time, sometimes if you try to just throw yourself in the deep end too deep, you might say after 3, 4, 5 words, this is too tiring, I'm leaving it, I'm going. So it depends on you, the person. And then you obviously want to know a few things in Arabic. You want to get to know your vocab, and you want to know the tools. So let's say you don't understand something later on, where can you find the meaning of this word? You want to know your sentence structure and your grammar. And then you want to get into whatever you learned Arabic for.
Yes, someone's saying, what about listening to Quran with translation? And I don't think that this can help teach you the Quran, the meaning of the Quran. But if you are learning it in conjunction with studying the meanings of the words of the Quran, and you're using this as a tool to enhance that, then possibly, because I listened to the Quran with its meaning for a long time before I could speak Arabic. I'd listen to the translation, and it never really helped me, to be honest with you, in terms of understanding the verses when they were recited on their own without the translation. So I don't think that will necessarily lead you to understanding the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it may be used as an assistant in addition to the rest of your techniques.
Yes, I think we're talking mainly more about people who want to understand and go deeper into the Quran, deeper into the Sunnah. So the translation is good. We're not saying it's bad. It's good for you to just know, instead of knowing absolutely nothing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned this in the Quran, and this is mentioned and that is mentioned. For example, this story is mentioned, and Musa alayhi salam went with Khadir, etc., etc. If you didn't read the translation, you wouldn't even know that much. But if you want to go deeper, then you would obviously need to get to your Arabic sources, your Arabic language. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely.
If some advice you would give to yourself, let's say, obviously you've learned the Arabic language, mashallah, I think 10 years ago or more, and since you came to Medina and before that, back then, when you think of some of the difficulties you went through, or some of the, I wouldn't say mistakes, but some of the things you would say that I wish I did quicker, or I wish I implemented this instead of this when it came to learning Arabic?
I think I'd like to learn more with regards to the reading side of things, increase my vocab a lot more. So I think I reached a point where I had enough vocab to understand what was being said in the books, in the text, and I didn't go beyond that. So I was, alhamdulillah, I was at a point where I can't say I understood every single word in the Quran, but I understood a lot of the words in the Quran. And I understood a lot of the words in the hadith that were mentioned, even if it wasn't specifically that word, the context would explain it to me. So it became easy to understand. But I didn't go beyond that. And that's something that I felt that I could have benefited from later on, after I had graduated, etc., where you now you start hearing words in conversation, or on the reading side of things, where you're reading something and it's a word that's not usually used in the Quran, in the Sunnah. It's something that it's a vocab, part of the vocab of the Arabic language that I didn't develop enough, I feel. So Alhamdulillah, of late I've been just trying to focus on those words as they come up in conversation, in groups that I'm in. I'll just look at it and see and understand, try to understand what's being said there. So in that way, it helps me, gain that vocabulary.
And from what I can gather, obviously you back home, you're trying every day at least to get your daily dose of Arabic, because a lot of times, no matter how long you've learned, if you leave it, even if you've learned for 6, 7, 10 years, you don't have that daily dose where you're listening or reading, and especially trying to speak it, you will forget.
Yes, absolutely. So, not only do you forget, but the spoken part of it becomes very difficult because you haven't spoken for years on end. So all of a sudden you're searching for words when you speak, whereas previously you would just speak fluently. So that's something, and it's hard to keep up with because you're now in an English environment where everybody is speaking English. Alhamdulillah, I've got some friends that I speak to in Arabic, so from time to time I'll speak to them, and that way it maintains things for me, so to speak. But I feel that it's something that you definitely lose out on in terms of understanding words, the Quran, the Sunnah. Alhamdulillah, in that way I haven't lost so much vocab. You do forget, but not as much, because you're in touch with it all the time. You're reading something, you're listening to something, you're watching a sheikh on YouTube, on any app that's there. So I think in that way, alhamdulillah, it hasn't been so bad.
MashaAllah, Allah grant you goodness, Sheikh. And I think when it comes to this same point, I think for me it was a bit different. If I could go back 10 years ago and see what I would have done a bit differently. I think when I first started, and I'm the type where when I want to learn something, I just jump in like this and I just want to know every single thing. So then when you start reading a book, for example, I'll read 4, 5, 6 lines, but then in those 6 lines, there's maybe 50 words I don't know, and I want to know what this word means and that word means and that. And that perfection, especially at the beginning, it harms your progress, for me especially. And eventually I got to a stage where I said that this is not possible. You can't carry on like this. So then I just used to read. And I used to get the gist of the sentence. What I didn't really understand, I used to leave it. I used to leave it. Because remember, you cannot start at the very beginning and be perfect. You cannot go into the masail deeper and deeper. Even the Arabic language has, same like fiqh, they have their own masail and they have their own debates between the different schools. And sometimes going too in-depth in these things, especially where there's no real fruit for you who wants to eventually go read the Quran and Sunnah, you waste a lot of time. So I think that perfection, don't look for perfection. Obviously, dedicate yourself. You won't understand everything. Thank Allah if you're learning, 2, 3 things every day new. In 10 days, that's 30 new things. By the end of the month, roughly 100 new things. And you practice. You must practice upon it. I found that, as you mentioned, you speak to people, learn with people, write down. There are people who carry vocabulary notebooks. I also did that at one stage. For me, I found that was of almost no benefit because I would write the word. I was just collecting a list of words. But then when is the time you go and read those words? And okay, you memorize the word. But if you haven't used the word in 5 or 6 different ways and different contexts, then that word will go. But if you use it without trying to memorize it, you'll eventually remember. Because a lot of times at the very beginning, everything's new. But then things start repeating. So you'll go to the same restaurant every day. You'll ride in roughly the same taxi every day, going to a similar place. And you'll talk. So you've got those words set for that conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. When you go too deep into it in the beginning, it becomes difficult for you. It becomes literally impossible. In fact, it can even discourage some people from studying altogether because you feel like this is just too cumbersome and I can't do it any longer. Whereas what you've mentioned is, exactly what people should be doing is just have a general sathi, what they call a general understanding, very above board, where you've got a general understanding. What I've missed, don't worry, I'll catch up with it later. It will come. And eventually you find on the 3rd or 4th time you've seen that thing, you've understood more and more, and then eventually you learn the whole thing. It's It may not be the best of examples, but we can give it for in order to understand. I had a biology teacher at school who told us, he said, look, don't memorize at all. But you know how the lyrics of a song, when you listen to the song once, you listen to it twice. The first time you get a certain number of words, you listen to it the third time, fourth time. By the 10th time, it's already in your mind. So I'm not advocating the listening to music off, but it stuck with me that, you know, if I want to memorize, if I want to learn something, then I've got to do it again, repeat it. You know, I've got my notes. I've got my notes. I look through them once, and then I go through it again, and I go through it again. And Alhamdulillah, I got an excellent grade in that subject that he was, you know, in biology, because I did this and I kept reading it. I used to like reading this subject anyway. So when I went back again and again, I found that eventually it was as though I had memorized it, even though I didn't really memorize.
Yes, you know, as you mentioned, and there's also your short-term memory, long-term memory. So you can sit and memorize a word for 50 times in the day. Ask yourself 1 week later or 2 weeks later, after you've memorized another 300 words, ask yourself about that word. You probably forget. Another similar example, when we follow in the chat here, there's a lot of names that we've been seeing now. This must be our 41st, I think, live session, or 42nd. MashaAllah. And there's names you've seen them before and you know who they are roughly. So yeah, and maybe with the songs, the same also when it comes to the Quran, you find a lot of people, I'm saying the example is that a lot of people who just listen to the Quran driving, coming, going, commuting, eventually they find themselves memorizing the Quran without them knowing that they actually memorizing it. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. You know, you had mentioned something interesting last week where you spoke about learning a language in a week or a month or a short period of time. What do you think about that? And like, can you enlighten us further?
So basically, you know, people have when something hasn't been done, anything you think of, if it hasn't been done, then a lot of people or everybody is they go into this project not believing that it's possible or believing that it's very difficult. And that's, if you look at the athletics, the same thing. Before the person broke 10 seconds, it was very hard. And before 1 mile, whatever it was, and then people, they put the time lower and lower, 9 seconds roughly. So after one person does it, the rest of the people, that's that mental barrier broken. So I thought of it. I said, is it possible to learn a language in 24 hours? 24 hours, I'm not talking about one day where you learn for 1 hour and sleep. No, 24 hours. Whether you stay up the whole day and whole night and learn it, or whether you take it over 24 days in 1 hour, or over a week. So what I found a lot of people who had spoken about it and who had tried this. And to understand the context, when you learn a language, when you learn anything, if you put your whole life in it, you'll never encompass the language, no matter who you are. And if you want to learn a specific part of it, so let's say you're into business, and you want to learn a specific part of that language, even when it comes to Islamic knowledge, you would find that a lot of people who know Arabic, who've learned in an institute, because they're mainly into the Quran and Sunnah, you would find that in normal conversations, if they're listening to the news, they can't really pick up. If they're reading a novel, they can't really pick up. If they'll understand bits and pieces, but it's a completely different ballgame. That part has its own language and its own words and its own way of doing things compared to the Quran and Sunnah side. So same when it comes to a language. I'm not saying you can learn and encompass the whole language, but a part of it, you can get a good idea. So come to business and learning in Chinese. You need to know a few numbers. You need to know a few questions to ask. You need to know how to ask the question that, what does this mean? Elaborate. So they say roughly 1,000 words. I'm not saying memorize. I'm saying you educate yourself with 1,000 words vocab. That includes words. It includes questions. Remember, if you've taken 2 or 3 words and combine them together, you can get about 30 words. Word number 1 and word number 3 and word. etc., etc. So you carry on. So with that, I found people who tried to do that. A lot of them were decently successful, where they wanted to learn about business. They know these are the questions I need to ask. This is how I ask them to re-explain it or retell me something. And yeah, so it's something I really want to try. And inshallah, maybe one of the days I will try that.
Inshallah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a brilliant way of learning as well. You know, the fact that you're talking about 1,000 words, I've read somewhere that this is what you use most of the time in a language. Anyways, these are the around about 1,000 words is what you'll use, and there's some that you very rarely use. So if that person's understood these, then they have a good grasp on what they need to achieve. So that's why we have books teaching you about the mufradat, the words of the Arabic language in the Quran, etc. I think it's something that people can really look into, especially someone who doesn't have the time to look so much into the grammar initially, or it's a bit too cumbersome. They can understand the meaning of these words, and eventually they'll get a gist of what's being recited, what they are reciting. It's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you look at anybody, any expats who go and live in a different country for work, etc., especially if the language is a bit different. I mean, look at the people, some of them buying and selling here. You would find they didn't go to an institute. But within the first 30 days, because every day they're buying and selling and asking, and I don't understand this and this and this, they eventually start speaking. Also, another important thing, if I could add when it comes to the Arabic language, is that if you see, remember that you're going to put in effort anyway. I've read somewhere that the same effort you put in to be mediocre is the same effort you put in to be even better. Don't be lazy, even if it means putting a bit more effort. Find somebody who's got a good accent if you want to learn from them. You want to, pick it up and learn it the right way. Don't look at people who are just average and compare yourself there. No, you should aim to be the best. Why not?
Yes, absolutely. The thing is, the other thing I wanted to mention was that there's someone who once said that he met a person who was learning Arabic and he had someone with him. And that guy was literally employed full time to be with him and teach him words and teach him how to say things and how to do things. So, of course, this person must have had a lot of money to be able to do that and pay someone to be with him 24/7, most of the time teaching him the Arabic language. But his goal was to learn it, I think it was in 6 weeks, to learn the entire language, like as much as he could of it. And he was moving. He was I think it was the CEO of one of these big, cola companies, so to speak, these big companies that make these fizzy drinks, carbonated drinks, etc. And he was going to this area in the Middle East, and he said, I need to learn. Within 6 weeks, I must master this language and get it completely. So he had someone teaching him the whole time, telling him words, telling him how to say things, and he was only interacting in Arabic as much as possible. So that is a bit of an extreme, like a way to do it. It might have worked for him, which is good. But if you want to do it that way also, you could also get very serious about it to the point where everything that you're doing for a short period of time is only in Arabic, and in that way you gather a lot more in a short space of time.
And as mentioned, the Sahabi Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu, he learned the language of the people, of the Jewish people at the time in under 20 days. If I can remember, it's 16 days. I stand to be corrected, but definitely under 20 days. He learned it in that period of time. Also, another interesting thing to mention is that when it comes to your commitment, depending on the type of person you are, if you're somebody who's disciplined, then that's something good. Otherwise, I found a lot of times I've tried everything to achieve certain things. And sometimes I found that one of my goals I wanted to achieve that I put off for a very long time, I put some money down, not to say I made a bet, but I said that I would pay this if I didn't achieve this. And subhanAllah, within I think 2 weeks, I got what I needed to, because it was money that I wasn't willing to lose.
Subhanallah, subhanallah. That's
accountability at times.
it's good if you can stick to those conditions that you've set upon yourself as well, because some of us would end up extending the time limit. It's okay, give yourself another week, 2 weeks. So, alhamdulillah, it's a lovely way of doing things as well. I think a lot of people can try to implement that
If
in their
there's
life.
something dear, if there's something dear to you, or something that you really can't lose, generally, if you put that on the line, then you would achieve. That's why I was thinking that why is it that when you've got school or you've got a university assignment, or there's certain things in your day to day, you know that you have to do them and you do them. And there's certain things that are more your dreams type of a thing, where, or your goals, and those things always get put to the side. So I think there's ways to go about it, and you have to look what's most suitable for yourself.
Yes, subhanallah. That's something that is I've been thinking about as well, in terms of what what are the dreams that I have, and what am I achieving every day from what I do, in a day. How does that bring me closer to what I want to achieve in 10 years or in 20 years, or by the end of my life? So I think something like that is excellent. Someone saying betting, astaghfirullah, is it allowed? This isn't a bet.
It's not a bet. So when you've got uh, betting is where two people are putting money, and you're saying that, okay, on this result or that. Here you're not putting money. It's more like you're paying a fine for not achieving something or for not doing something. So you're punishing yourself. You're not taking money from anybody else.
Yes, subhanallah. What a good response. And alhamdulillah, yeah. I think it's good that the person asks as well, that is betting allowed? Is it something that is,
Yeah,
uh,
it's
yeah,
something that, yeah, that should
yes,
be
yes.
mentioned. And where you can play for money, where can't you play for money, and where certain things, for example, if you're running a competition, people are coming to play soccer, how does it work and where does it come? So inshallah, we'll mention that another time, inshallah.
I was
Speaking
just
about, like, for
thinking
example, yeah.
that perhaps we should talk about that, about gaming next week.
Inshallah, we can do gaming or competitions, sport, maybe. Inshallah, we look into it.
Yeah,
Sheikh,
something of that,
we've
inshallah.
had a good session. I think this is one of our longest sessions, alhamdulillah. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Much appreciated. Barakallahu fikum. And nice chatting.
Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, we meet next week. We might be speaking about gaming and betting and that type of thing. Maybe not. We'll see how it goes, inshallah. Maybe we'll touch on some of the betting along with some other things to do with finance, maybe 3 or 4 things, maybe, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all goodness. Shaykhana, inshallah, we see you next week.
Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.